Oh, Shabbat is a time for special connection and special extra bits of soul. So let's bring it in and lift our hearts in a blessing over our learning. Together, please, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign in all time and space, who makes us holy in connecting command and commands us to engage in these words of Torah. Thank you, everyone. For each session during our Mitzvah and Mysticism journey, we've had three parts. We've looked at the backstory for the Mitzvah that we unpack together. There's always a backstory. Then we talk through some of the core texts that lay out the mahu, the what of the mitzvah, the holy doing. And then we, like a bird has two wings, the mitzvah itself is one wing, but the bird can't fly without two. So we offer up mystical and spiritual ways to infuse the mitzvah with height. And we'll do that today also with the Shabbat candles. Many of us have an embedded sense of what Shabbat is. For many of us, Shabbat is the day of rest. And that begins with Genesis 2, the day of rest, because Vayom HaShavi'i, God vayishbot, God rested, God Shabbated from the completion of the work. Shabbat in this understanding is not the end of creation, but the fulfillment of creation. God finished on the seventh day, not the sixth, meaning that what needed to be created was Shabbat. But Genesis 2 doesn't tell us anything more than that. What Shabbat invites us into has to come later. This week's Torah portion includes Leviticus 23, which lays out the entire Jewish calendar from Shabbat and Passover all the way through. God speaks to Moses and says, speak to the peeps, speak to the children of Israel, say to them, you will proclaim the festive times of Yud He Vav He to be holy. These are my times, and the first of those times is Shabbat. For 6 days, your work will be done, and the seventh day will be Shabbat Shabbaton, a Shabbat that is itself a Shabbat, which is holy, and we do no work on it. Now we know something about what Shabbat is. The backstory is don't work. But this is not fully true. The real backstory comes in the book of Exodus. We are out of Egypt. We've received the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments include one for Shabbat. The Shabbat rendition in the 10 Commandments also says do no work, but we have no idea what that means. So along comes Exodus 35 and uses much the same language. For 6 days, work will be done. The definition of a slave is someone who has to work all 7 days. We are not that. We have Shabbat. And the seventh day will be holy to you, a Shabbat Shabbaton to God. Whoever does work on it in the Exodus old system was subject to the death penalty. I render that a little bit differently now. One who works all the time does not fully live. But what does that mean? Kindle no fire in all your dwellings on the Shabbat day. The only Torah commandment of Shabbat is don't work and don't light a fire. When manna fell, there would be 2 days worth of manna to collect on Friday, so you wouldn't have to go out and collect manna on Saturday, but that's it. Everything else was left until later. Everything. The different forms of work, the 39 melachot that the rabbis associated with the building of the Mishkan, whatever it took to build the Mishkan, the sewing and the chopping and and all of that, those were the categories. that everything would be allegorized to for all of Jewish history. That's the backstory. So if there's going to be one ritual moment that demarcates the start of Shabbat, and given that Torah tells us the only thing we know for absolute sure we're not supposed to do on Shabbat is light a fire, then what are we going to do as the last thing before Shabbat comes in? We're going to light a fire. The question is why? And so let's unpack the mitzvah of what it is to kindle the Shabbat flame. You would imagine that this would be worked out in Talmud. This would have been very clear. But actually not so much. The tractate of Talmud that most focuses on Shabbat, surprisingly enough, it's called Shabbat, unpacks the idea of kindling a Shabbat lamp. And the discussion doesn't start out the way we would imagine. Most of us have these images in our minds. We take 2 candles and we bring in the light and we wrap our hands, and there are all these beautiful, heartfelt, mystical, spiritual things we do. But in Talmud, it starts with, can you kindle a Shabbat lamp with tar? The answer is no. And why not? Rabbah said, because it smells. Because bad odor might induce one to forsake the light and leave. So Abaye, another one of our Talmud heroes, says, so let him leave. What's the problem? Rabbah says, She'ani omer hadlakat ner b'Shabbat chova. But I say that kindling a Shabbat light is an obligation. And from this began the obligation to light on Shabbat. But why? We still don't know why. So Rashi, our winemaker of the very early Middle Ages, comes along and says, kindling lights is an obligation to honor Shabbat. And why? Because an important meal is only eaten in a well-lit place. So of course, it's really about the food. It's about the seudah. It's about the enjoyment. We make a special meal for Shabbat. And what makes a special meal a special meal? Well, the surroundings. You put a lovely tablecloth, you do the thing, and of course you're going to light. Now back then, candles were luxuries. And so the expression of offering our best on Shabbat took form in terms of kindling a light. So far, my hands have not left my sleeve. Along comes Shulchan Aruch and finally lays out the blessing that to many of us is one of the first blessings we learn, one of the blessings that feels closest to us. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Shabbat. There are many tunes. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign in all time and space, who makes us holy in connecting command, commands us to kindle the light of Shabbat. So far, hopefully familiar for many of us. Along comes the Ramah, Moshe Isserles, who was the note taker for Shulchan Aruch. And he wrote this really cool thing. Some say we bless before the kindling, and some say we bless after the kindling. Last time, when we looked at Hamotzi, we unpacked a Jewish principle that we offer a blessing before we benefit from something. Before we benefit from anything of this world, we offer a bracha for it because its emanation starts grounded in divinity, in holiness, which raises a pretty difficult question. If you light the candles and then say the blessing, you've seen the candles, you've benefited from it. If you say the blessing and then you light the candles and you say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, it's now Shabbat. You brought in Shabbat, which means you can't light the candle. We're kind of stuck. So what do? The traditional response also comes from the Ramah Moshe Isserles in the Shulchan Aruch. He writes this: as one should not benefit from an act until after the blessing, we're going to put our hand in front of the candle after we light it, after the ignition. We haven't seen it. And then we make the bracha. And then we remove the hand. This is making the blessing before the act. And that's the practice. So here we're used to putting our hand and 3 times and sending the light where it needs to go. Many of us have learned many different traditions, often through perhaps our mothers, if our moms were in that line, or by watching other people. And often there's this elaborate, beautiful choreography of hands and embodied. And this is where it started, so that we shouldn't receive the benefit of the light before offering a bracha over it. Julie, I see a question from Deborah coming in. I don't know if we're able to unmute.
Oh, yes. I think can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Deborah.
So I have a question. Somebody told me that you only cover your eyes when lighting the candles, and I usually, bring forth 3 times and all that. But they told me to only do it for Shabbat. So let's say you were lighting candles for some other Jewish holiday, that you don't cover your eyes for those and bring in your hands 3 times. Is that correct?
I'm going to rephrase. I love your question, Deborah. I'm going to rephrase it a little differently. Jewish tradition is multivocal, it's multivariant. There are a lot of pathways, but let's apply the logic together. On many holidays, many festivals that are proclaimed in this week's Torah portion, we are to do no work. If one of the definitions of work is lighting a fire, then it would stand to reason that we would light the candle right before the holiday. If we receive the benefit of something without offering the blessing, and that's still a problem, then it would stand to reason that we would want to engage in that ritual with this intention in mind, not just on Shabbat, but also on those Chagim. And so I would answer your question, no, I would honor this Shabbat practice also for those holidays. Hanukkah is different. Hanukkah does not say don't work. Hanukkah does not appear in Torah. Hanukkah would not have that restriction. And so when you think of lighting the candles and we're going one after the other, I've never seen a ritual of closing your eyes, especially because if we did, we'd probably cause an accident. So for Hanukkah, I would be eyes wide open. For most of the other holidays, I would engage in a practice like this. I hope that's helpful, Deborah. Now, while we're stopped, I made a comment about mainly through the women. That is untrue. While in modern Judaism, many people believe that the quote obligation falls on the woman, it is not actually a traditional gender differentiation. Shulchan Aruch is very clear. A man and woman must have in their houses an ignited lamp on Shabbat. And it's so important that even if you don't have what to eat, It's so important to bring in that light, that we're to beg at the door and take oil and light a lamp, because this is part of this category called Oneg Shabbat, which we'll get to in a second. Now, of course, whoever's responsible for the house and whoever's engaged in the household needs. And so Shulchan Aruch sort of stands on both sides and says women are more responsible, but not because they're women. This is an obligation for all of us. So if you have a household, it's on you. Doesn't matter what gender or how you recognize gender. It's not at all about gender. It's about bringing in light for the reason of Onig. Now, what's Onig? Bring in the prophet Isaiah. Before I do, Tali Ann raises a hand. Can we unmute Tali, please?
Tali, you're unmuted.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Hi.
Right? Can you hear me? Yeah?
I can.
Great. Okay. So I want to go back to that a minute before you proceed about women. Since I walk in all movements, I guess, now I guess I tend to more traditional, but I think the concept that coming back biblically from Sarah, that Sarah the first gave us the first mitzvah as women, was the pulling of challah, and the second mitzvah, and the lighting of the candles. So I think people, and when you have visions in homes, you see women, the daughters doing that. I know in my home, because I light so many candles, because I like doing a lot of light. So, and it's just been recent that my husband, because both of our mothers have blessed memory, so he lights her candle. I light my mother's. So he has been lighting candles with me, but that's just been in the last few years. But I think most people have raised in this ongoing lador vador as the women proceed with that mitzvah.
Yeah, that's probably.
Just like I would say also the same thing of one, because I'm a former cantor. I have always done, I do most of the singing by Hulu to the Kiddush. And when I've had people come to my home who are not, come from more traditional home, it's been, it's not a comfort zone. So I think it's what's a minhag, a family minhag.
Right, minhag tradition. In Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law that arose in the Middle Ages, the compilation of the law as it had evolved, there was no gendering of this mitzvah as a matter of what an academic would call gender essentialism. There is nothing essentially feminist or feminine about this mitzvah. Over time, because women kept the home and hearth, it was, and Talmud lays this out, the guy goes to shul, the woman's in the home, and so arose beautiful and controversial stories about the guy coming home. And if your Shabbat table is set, who set it, do you think? And if there's a beautiful candle on it, then one angel says, may next Shabbat be just like this one, and the other angel says, amen. And if it's not set, who do you think said it? Then may next Shabbat be just like this one, amen. But it's not gendered. Over time, over centuries, that minhag, that tradition evolved, but it's not core, in my understanding, to Jewish engagement with that beautiful dance with Shabbat. And Shulchan Aruch makes clear, if you're a person and you've got a home, it's on you to have that light. And why becomes the question. The why, because of Onik. Now, many of us understand Oneg as a noun. Thank you, Mrs. Schwartzfield, for sponsoring today's Oneg. Oneg is really an adjective. It means delight. What does Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, say of this? And Talmud picks this up. The job of Shabbat, if we could hire Shabbat to do a job, it isn't just rest, it's delight. If on Shabbat you restrain your foot from pursuing your business on my capital M holy day, and you call Shabbat an Oneg, to honor the holy God and God's Shabbat by not going in your usual ways and pursuing your business and speaking vanities, just not paying attention, then you will delight in Yod He Vav He. And I will cause you to ride the earth's high places, and I will feed you with the heritage of Yaakov your father. Ki pi Yod He Vav He diber, for the mouth of Adonai has spoken. That the oneg, the delight of Shabbat, is what this is about. And in Shulchan Aruch, we bring in that light for the purpose of bringing in delight. It happens to be a pun in English, but it works. The light is for the purpose of delight, which means that if all you have is a candle and you don't delight in it, the physical mitzvah of lighting the candle is not enough to fulfill the kavanah, the intention, which is oneg. Look again then at the way the Shulchan Aruch lays out what this is. Talian described lighting many candles. What is the mitzvah? One must be attentive to make beautiful light, a beautiful candle. And some with spiritual intention, says the Shulchan Aruch, will light two. So if you have one candle on your table, are you doing it wrong? Absolutely not. The minhag arose to have two. And the reason for two, according to Shulchan Aruch, one corresponding to Zachor, one corresponding to Shamor. What does that mean? Look down at Exodus. The Ten Commandments, rendition 1, says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. Remember Shabbat by Zachor, the Shabbat day, to make it holy. But in the retelling in the book of Deuteronomy, there was a little change. Zachor became Shamor. Observe or guard the Shabbat day. Our ancestors noted that these two words, Zachor and Shamor, are not the same. And along comes Alkabetz in the 1500s and writes Lecha Dodi, and the first verse is, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibor echad. Those two words, Shamor and Zachor, in one utterance. How could God do it twice? God did it once. Hishmiyanu ela meyuchad, made heard to us by the one unified God. It's a miracle. It was said in two different words at once. It's the only way to resolve the Exodus-Deuteronomy split, unless Moses wasn't paying attention. And so back into Shulchan Aruch. One candle is for Zachor, and one candle is for Shamor. One is for remembering, the other is for observing. Now, if you want to add 3 lights or 4 lights, great. And such is our custom, Talian. Because the purpose of the mitzvah is oneg. The purpose of the mitzvah is delight. And so if in your lighting you have a minhag to light your grandmother's over here, and one for this child and one for that child, fantastic. The purpose is delight. And we start off Shabbat with that delight. How amazing that the mitzvah itself, not the spiritual overlay, not the story we tell about it, but the mitzvah itself is about oneg, about honoring Shabbat like a coveted guest. It's not about the doing only. It's already, without any mysticism at all, it's the enjoyment. So that's what the mitzvah is. Wow, here comes the mysticism. Shamaru b'nei Israel. The children of Israel will keep Shabbat, to make Shabbat in all their generations as an everlasting covenant. Ve'ini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam. Between me and the children of Israel, it is an eternal sign, a sign forever. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai. For in 6 days God made et hashamayim v'et haaretz, made the heavens and earth. Uvayom hashvi, and on the 7th day, as we saw, Shabbat vayinafash. Shabbat, God Shabbated. Vayinafash. If it looks like it has the word nafash or nefesh in there, it does. This is something about soul. And grammatically, vayinafash really means ensoulified. God ensoulified. God souled. S-O-U-L-E-D. What could that possibly mean? Well, Talmud comes and introduces a concept that maybe we've heard, that the Holy Blessed One gives a person an additional soul on Shabbat Eve, and at the end of Shabbat removes her, as it is said, Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash. Take that in for a second. I'm going to stop my screen and just sort of look at everybody and get everybody's, there's a lot of chatting going on here. To have a second soul, an extra soul, how many of us are totally thumbs up on this? I'm seeing a bunch of thumbs. How many of us are super skeptical about this? Okay, I'm seeing some skeptics. I'm seeing some of you not voting. I'm totally down with that. What interests me in this moment is not the very interesting academic or spiritual question of whether I have two souls. What interests me, I do see that Linda has a hand, I'm going to get you right there in a second, is whether it's possible that we can ensoul more. A story is told about the teacher of my teachers, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory. He says that one day he was speaking with his children, and one of his children said, Abba, yes, when you're asleep, you can awake, right? And Reb Zalman says to his child, yeah, sure. And the kid says to his father, so when you're awake, can you awake more? If Shabbat is not ordinary time, if Shabbat is about the Onik, if Shabbat is about the access to the spiritual, then is it possible that one way we can understand this extra soul is not a literal extra soul, but more access to our soul? Like the veils of ordinary consciousness fall away, and we become more of who we really are. We see the world as ensouled. We see the world through soul eyes. We see the world as having a soul, and that soul is God flowing in time. And if I happen to experience that as if I have a second soul, Matov, great. I'm not personally interested in whether my second soul is named Frank and whether it gets along with the first one and do they know how to tango. For me, I'm interested in the spiritual experience of soul itself, that Shabbat is soul itself, Shabbat ba'inafash, and as God, so us. Linda, you've got a hand up.
I got a hand up.
Go for it.
So if one is good, then two is better, right?
Is one enough? Is six too many? Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, do we have the second soul only on Shabbat, or do we always have the second soul and it just becomes more soulified, to use your word, on Shabbat? Or maybe once we light the candles. And then maybe after the 25th hour, it kind of decreases?
I can only share my own experience with you, Linda, and it's this. When I'm in that space, when I have that kavanah, when I'm in that consciousness, whether I have one soul or two souls is a mind question, and I'm not in that mind space. I'm in the experience of soul. So the question itself kind of falls away. Not that I find it unimportant. There's tremendous texts written about the neshama yetera, the oversoul, the soul that really comes to all of us, the Shekhinah combining with the Kadosh Baruch Hu in that mysticism that was Zohar's focus, that the God of transcendence and the God of immanence comes together, and when they do, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, waters through, and we get drenched in that spiritual flow, and that's how the second soul comes to us. There are beautiful stories about this. Are they literally, factually true? In this moment, my response is that I don't care. What I care about is opening myself up to receive that flow, and whether it's received as more of what I already have or something new altogether, to me does not matter.
Thank you.
Also known as the Great Rabbinic Dodge.
We have time for another question that came in over chat.
Sure, go for it. I may not be able to see it, so please.
Yes. This is from Shirley. I understand it as God giving Shabbat a soul of its own, available for us to know one day. Then God takes the Shabbat soul away when Shabbat ends, but the soul belongs to Shabbat itself, not the observer of Shabbat.
So Shirley, I love that. And of course, to every story, there's a counter story. Perhaps some of us have heard this one. Day 1 has a partner called day 2. Day 3 has a partner called day 4. I can't even count. Day 5 has a partner called day 6. Shabbat goes to God and says, God, why didn't you make me a partner? And God said, but I did make you a partner. The people will be your partner. And so when we receive that extra soul, the soul we're receiving is the soul of our partner, which we may call Shabbat, which we may call Shekhinah, which we may call God, which we may call our higher selves. Our languaging will fail. And that's okay with me. Beautiful, Shirley. Thank you. There are so many stories, so many sacred stories about Shabbat, because Shabbat is a touchstone of Jewish life. We receive that soul. And now what does that have to do with the light? Proverbs offers that the light of God is the human soul. Searching, yearning for all the innermost parts. The light of God, the light that we now allegorize to Shabbat, is a light that can open up every inner part. It's a light that can, by its nature, reach out. There's nothing that it can't touch. This is a repair of the world. As Zohar puts it, since humanity was created on the 6th day, Genesis, day 6, that's for us, we as humanity, we repair and we epitomize all that's above and all that's below. And so we unify and complete that whole. But we just read in Genesis that Shabbat is the completion. So Dorothy is right. We and Shabbat together are the completion. We and Shabbat together are that light together. When we light, In my community, we have a tradition of saying this. When we light for Shabbat, if it's true that God is one, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, one. If it's true that God is one, then there too also is one light. There's only one light. So when we light the Shabbat candles, what is that light? I asked that question when I did a visit to a community elsewhere in the Northeast. And I asked it not of adults, but of children. Children are really good at this. Children are really good at seeing things that are not physically before our eyes, but are no less true. And I asked them, tell me about the light that you see in Torah. And here's a short list of what they came back with. There's the light of creation, let there be light. There's the light that was the angel in the burning bush. There's the eternal flame on top of the altar in a synagogue, the Ner Tamid. There's the light of the fire speaking from Sinai. It's all one light. It's all God, manifesting as light. Now, of course, when you're talking to 100 children, there's always going to be one who's not paying attention. And so 12-year-old, we'll call her Susie, was sitting in the corner looking very bored. Turns out she was listening better than I imagined, because after the session, she came to me and she showed me what she was drawing. She drew a picture of herself lighting Shabbat candles, surrounded in light. A 12-year-old lighting Shabbat candles, surrounding herself in light. And she looked at me and she said, I've always known that, but I didn't know that Jewish knew that. And I went, oh. There is, my friends, only one light. If the purpose of the Shabbat candle is Onig, delight, then every time we light Shabbat candles, it's an opportunity to send that light where it needs to go. It is the light that completes creation. It's the light that is the source of creation. It is the light that is the source of our freedom, burning bush. It is the light that is the source of Torah, Sinai. It is the light that is the source of our GPS system in the desert. We followed that light. There's only one. So every time we light Shabbat candles, and we put our hand over, if that's our minhag, or we close our eyes like this, we sweep the light. We can even feel it in our hands. We can send the light where it needs to go. There's no darkness it can't penetrate. And we bless. In that moment, we can take in that neshama yetara, that extra soul spark, with intention to inhabit that light, to become that light, to experience that light as the oneg, the joy, the delight that makes Shabbat, Shabbat. It isn't just about a candle anymore. In fact, it never really was. It's a way for us to manifest that light in the world, and thereby, in turn, become that light. I'm seeing a whole bunch of hands and questions wanting to come forward. Julie, can I ask you to help air traffic control this?
I am in the tower. So if folks want to make a comment, have a question, you can either do the raise hand function, or you can chat your question in the chat box, or you can say in the chat box, hey, I have a question. It won't be terribly useful right now to wave your hand because there are too many little screens and I can't see everyone. So I apologize in advance. We both apologize in advance if we don't get to everyone's question. Sorry about that, but hopefully we will get to a bunch of them. Okay, so.
I see Linda has a hand.
Yes. Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, okay. I just want to make a comment, backing up a little bit to one of the stories about partnering with the days. It seems very apt nowadays when every day seems the same, like Groundhog Day, and we're all living for Shabbat. And that day always, even in a pandemic, feels different. And I'm extra grateful for Shabbat because it is never like any of the other days of the week, and especially now where every other day of the week feels like the same, if that made any sense.
Oh boy, howdy does it. I'm with you, Linda. Thank you. When we say la'asot et Shabbat, when we make Shabbat, it's those days are really going to feel very similar to each other without our holy agency as partners with God to help make the days feel different, especially Shabbat. So thank you, Linda.
We have another question in the chat box. I'm intrigued about the use of God and the use of Yud He Vav He.
Uh-huh.
Me Adonai means God. So can you explain?
I ask my B'nai Mitzvah, what do you call God? What's God's name? Does God have a name? And they say, well, Adonai, right? And I go, So the Yud at the end is my, Adonai, and Adon means Lord, my Lord. Is that God's name? And the young adult goes, I never thought of it that way. I said, well, turns out that we Jews have a lot to say about names and naming. We go all the way back to Eden, when Adam, the first person, went and gave everybody a name. If we look at our own Torah, the one that we call God has unfolded through many names. Elohim was the creator. El Shaddai. El was an old Canaanite name for God. Julie is absolutely right. There are 10 different names for God in Torah. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Moses says to God at the burning bush, you want to send me back there? They're going to say, okay, who is this liberator? What's this person's name? Is this a person? And we've all seen the Cecil B. DeMille movie, right? That moment at the burning bush. I am that I am. Terrible mistranslation. It's not present tense, it's future tense. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Tell them, eheyeh, I will be sent to you. As if to say, don't pin me down. You can't pin me down. Yud He Vav He became the name that Moses heard, by which God did not reveal God's self to Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rachel and Rebecca and Leah. God has unfolded by many names. Adonai Echad is God's name. Echad is God's name, the healer. Is God's name the warrior? I don't know that any human agency that ever could come up with language, because we are limited, could ever describe the infinite any more than we could hold the ocean in a thimble. We do the best we can with our words because words are what we got. I'm more interested in the experience than the title. I hope that's helpful.
We're getting a few requests for your email or ways to contact you.
Great, thank you. On the source sheet at the very top is my synagogue email address. Your shul by the sea at
Sorry, what is that address?
yourshulbythesea@gmail.com. It is on the source sheet, right up on top. I will share the screen again. So it's right here, and my very super synagogue secretary administrator has been sending me a number of emails from members of the My Jewish Learning community. So if you have a follow-up question that we haven't reached, thank you for understanding this digital format. The best way to reach me will be at that email address, and I do try my very best to answer every single one of them. So if there's something that we've missed here, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, and if for folks who haven't heard back yet, I'm sure it's sometimes these communications will take time. So if we would all have patience in hearing back, and maybe try again if you didn't hear back. And the same goes for me. So apologies if I have not responded to someone who has chatted me. We have another question. How
Great.
could we have lost the name of God that the high priest would call upon in Yom Kippur? Seems kind of important.
I'm going to make sure I'm hearing the question. Is it how did we?
How did we?
I don't know. That's a wonderful question. It might be that anyone ever heard of the Sherlock Holmes story of the dog that didn't bark? Anyone an Arthur Conan Doyle fan here? That there might actually be more for us to learn in not knowing it. Maybe we're not supposed to. I mean, surely if the one that we call God wanted us to know, we would know. But people get fixated on names. Maybe there's something really important in how we understand divinity and our relationship with divinity that transcends a particular name. It's not God, it's Yahweh. It's not God, it's Allah. It's not God, it's Jesus. It's not God, it's Buddha. You could imagine where that goes. Now, I stand fully and authentically in Judaism. And to me, God is unnameable. We have names by which we can relate. But it's about the relation and the experience, not the noun. To give God a fixed name is to fix God in place. And I personally do not understand a God that is transcendent and infinite ever to be capable of squeezing into any fixed name. So maybe that's exactly why we lost the name. We're not supposed to have it. It's not about the name.
Right. And I'll just read a couple of comments that. I understand from the Zohar that we don't name what we haven't attained. It's from Jennifer. Beverly says, my thought is that the name is so holy and we have no temple and no Kohen Gadol, we aren't to know it, to protect us from using it in the wrong way. Sorry, I'm reading quickly. It's got to be because only the high priest was allowed to say it, and only on Yom Kippur. And since the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, so no one has been able to see it since then. So we could understand maybe how it would have been lost. And a couple other questions if we have time. Do we have time?
I'm here, of course.
So I get this sense of sadness when the candle flame is coming to its end. So I've been tempted to relight it with the flame before the candle finishes. Does anyone relate to this feeling? Maybe this is a good thing in that it reminds me of how special a time it is. Just a thought.
So I've heard that, and I empathize with that very much because that candle is so evocative of so much that just listen to the comments that are coming forward. It's about that light, right? And so we don't want to let that light go out. Sure. But the symbol is just a symbol. The light is still there. I would be concerned halachically if the light went out and we suddenly tried to relight it. For those of us who live a halachically traditional way of observing Shabbat, what do we know about honoring Shabbat in terms of the nuts and bolts? Don't work, don't light fire. So I would be concerned about thinking that we could just save that fire. Oh, it went out. Oh, I'll just light it again. The whole point is not to light it again. So even if we feel that longing when the light goes out, maybe that becomes a spiritual opportunity to see the light with a different quality of vision rather than physically keeping the light burning. But I do hear the yearning. That light is very special.